After Rookie Greentail earned back his freedom, he returned to a lavish welcome ceremony in the Commonwealth, as was the tendency for liberated exiles.
I think we read this.
Hush.
Okay,
It was
good.
everything he could have hoped for, and soon he was well off, surrounded by luxury and choosing between various exciting opportunities. However, he must have given in to his better judgment, as he did end up siding with Wilfred Sandalwood's revolutionary forces as he promised. On the night of the scribe's return, Greentail kept busy barking orders to Wilfred's agents as the situation grew tenser. He took rather well to leadership. When dawn finally came and it became clear that the Commonwealth that everybody knew would be no more, he realized many new opportunities awaited. He began quite a lucrative career for himself, manufacturing and selling replica merchandise inspired by the downside. His main struggle was to meet demand. An aspect of his conscience cautioned him against making light of such a thing, but the money was too good, and soon his family was as well off as he'd always said. One of his orders of business was to seek out one of his old companions, Pamitha Thane, to whom he took a liking during their quest for freedom. They bonded further over love of drink, and supported one another through uncertain times that lay in store. Greentail always did his best to keep in touch with all his many friends, and knew that he owed his fortunes to them. He made a special point of staying close with the group of friends he came to know so well during his time with the Nightwings, wherever they were. They shared a special understanding that put even Greentail at a loss for words sometimes.
Aww.
Alright.
Who's next? I think we can literally find out what happened to everyone here.
I want to know what happened to everyone. Our boy. Go find our boy. I love our boy.
Hedwyn?
Our boy, yeah. After his liberation, Hedwyn was instrumental in the events leading to the fall of the Commonwealth, and was vital to the outcome of the plan. He was the one who led the raid on the stronghold where the Archjustice Androbles the Ninth was holed up when the fighting grew fierce. With him, then and thereafter, was one of the winged harps of the High Wing remnants, later identified as Fikani Shang. Their bond was vital to the peace that followed. Yes! Love wins! In all his days as a leader in the Sarian Union, Hedwyn oft confided in his friend Jadariel. Despite her intense manner, there was no one whom he trusted more in times when circumspection was required. Hedwyn would often think back about the vow he made at the beginning of his quest for freedom. Although he cherished all the friendships he made, he had pledged to Jadariel, Rookie Greentail, and the Reader of the Nightwings that they might all be free again together. He had broken that vow, for in the end, not all of them were able to return. A terrible guilt over this darkened his mood for a time. However, the others whom he still knew lifted his spirits, much like he had often lifted theirs. All the Nightwings knew the stakes. While the others who stood with the Nightwings were not all able to remain in contact thus, Hedwyn thought of each of them often, and so in turn did they oft think of him. The Commonwealth had never provided a sense of home for the one they had called Faye the Fair. So she was surprised on her return that she was so well treated. She felt uneasy about it, and besides, she knew that she would do her best to fulfill the pledge she had made to her friends. Even she could not have expected the impact she would have on the events that followed, which gave rise to our Sarian Union. Faye stood with the others on the night of Scribe's return. She did not take up arms, but spoke of the Scribes with conviction and sincerity. Others were so caught off guard that it helped quell the danger of the situation. After the fall of the Commonwealth, there was a renewed interest in the legend of the 8 Scribes. and many new interpretations of their histories and teachings. Faye found herself at the center of all this. Her way of speaking continued to compel a growing audience. She swayed many people from their astralist beliefs. Soon, the eighth word, which had lost favor for the people during the reign of the Commonwealth, sought her out and asked her formally to join, and she did, right away. Through it all, she would wonder how her little friend Tizo had fared. While they were divided now by a great distance, he always remained in her heart. She cited her relationship with Jodariel as the single most important in her life. Jodariel would always provide her with a circumspect perspective and the wisdom of experience. Faye always was devoted to her faith, but more so to her friends. Many people in the Saurian Union cited that her gentle manner and unwavering conviction helped them brave the changing times with courage and with grace. After her liberation, Jodariel soon became an icon of the movement that led to the collapse of the Commonwealth and the rise of the Saurian Union. Her military prowess and experience led to key victories in clashes against Commonwealth loyalists. Each time, she was able to subdue the opposition, avoiding lethal force. In the uncertain times that followed, Jodariel's seasoned expertise often came into play, both in matters of security and of state. For instance, she conscripted... Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
She conscripted and trained a team of volunteers in public safety. The community did not know what to make of such a cordial bunch at first, but soon came to value their service. They have stood for the people ever since, and we celebrate their founding day each year. She remained close with Hedwyn all through this experience, and they supported each other through their struggles many, many times. She kept an eye on Faye, who nonetheless demonstrated a surprising knack to get by on her own, though Jodariel was always willing to provide assistance just in case. She continued training on her own, a regimen that grew stricter with each passing year. There were those who sought to train with her, and she sometimes obliged. There remained one other constant in her life. She would always remember her days among the Nightwings, and with fondness for the most part. After regaining her freedom, Pemetha Thane found herself in a difficult position. Having once betrayed her people of the Highwing remnants, she knew that she would not be welcome in her native home. She did not trust the Commonwealth either. Instead, she found her place among Volfred Sandalwood's agents, who were busy doing their part to fulfill the plan. The plan took certain unexpected turns, but in the end resulted in the outcome Sandalwood had envisioned. It was fortunate that the Highwing remnants arrived when they did on the night of Scribe's return. However, Pemetha denied any involvement with or foreknowledge of this. Afterward, Pemetha played an active part in negotiating terms between the Highwing remnants and the new nation that would become our Saurian Union. Her previous attempt at something of the sort led to her exile. She must have felt some satisfaction to succeed this time around. Sometime later, Pemetha had an unexpected run-in with Rookie Greentail, with whom she had spent a fair amount of time while traveling with the Nightwings. Under these new set of circumstances, it turned out the two had more to talk about, and rather more in common. They would often put to test which of them was able to outdrink the other. It is unclear as to which of them prevailed in that contest in the end. One day, Pemetha received an invitation to return to the Highwing remnants, where she was to be fully pardoned. That was where she ran into her blood sister, Tamitha. For the first time since their exile, their reunion was not as amicable as Pemetha may have hoped, and Tamitha, still resentful of their history together, turned violent. Pemetha would later brush aside the incident, though always had an injury to show for it. Yet, from that point on, the blood sisters were back on speaking terms, at least for the most part. Later, when asked, Pamitha Thane admitted she felt as though she had no home to call her own. This was during an interview conducted amid an extensive trip abroad, for she had traveled thousands of leagues beyond the bounds of the Saurian Union. Pamitha continued to journey thus, citing that it reminded her of when she was younger and could fly unfettered. Were you crying too, bro?
No, not that teary, but...
Curly doesn't cry that much. I, however, am a whiny little bitch. Let's see what Tizo's doing. Killing fish? I'm so sorry we couldn't let you see the Commonwealth, Tizo. Can't you just, switch places with Messenger Imp? Once the rites had ended, the Imp, Tizo, had a job to do, quite unlike most exiles trapped forever in the downside. The lone minstrel asked that he watch over the Black Wagon, which the Nightwings had used extensively for travel and for shelter all throughout their quest. Tizo obliged, for he knew that wagon, as well as its drive-imp inhabitants, perhaps better than anyone. What became of the wagon exactly was never verified, as evidence of Tizo's thorough work. After that, he liked to while away his days with any of his friends, or else with fellow imps. Sandalwood sometimes called for his assistance, and Tizo was always happy to oblige. The two would often reminisce about their times with the lone minstrel. He often chirped about the reader of the Nightwings, with whom he built quite a rapport. The reader understood him perhaps better than anyone. Except for Faye, who we didn't get to hang out with anymore because we sent her home. Indeed, Tizo would often express wistful gratitude for all his time with the Nightwings, and their many adventures throughout the land that was always his home. Other than that, Tizo would sometimes help interpret for messenger imps relaying news to and from the Saurian Union. Despite having gained significant celebrity abroad, he never let it go to his head. And he would go fishing in the Sea of Solace at every single chance he got.
Everything's gonna be fine.
I'm crying so hard right now.
Are you okay? You wanna stop?
I'm so sorry we didn't get to learn more about you, Sandra. After the cycle of the rites he's turning, records of what happened to the Black Wagon of the Nightwings became inconclusive and contradictory. Some accounts suggest that the exiles of the Nightwings who remained in the downside continued to make use of the Black Wagon as their place of shelter and their means of travel. However, there is no record of what happened to the wagon's contents, such as the Book of Rites or the Beyonder Crystal said to be haunted by the apparition of Sandra the Unseeing. One possibility is that, when the lone minstrel took his leave, he took the Beyonder Crystal with him, for he was thus obliged. By this line of reasoning, however, the Black Wagon itself should have been taken also. Others remain skeptical that the Beyonder Crystal ever existed, or rather, that the visions that it granted were anything other than the result of an active imagination or a fever dream. The bog dwellers of the southern bogs offer still another explanation, for they are familiar with binding enchantments. If there existed such an object, in which the Sisters of the Ark had been expelled for more than 800 years, then the enchantment could have expired along with the light of the stars. What this would have meant for Sandra and the Beyonders is difficult to say for certain, other than it may have meant that they were finally released. Nevertheless, the fates of Sandra and the Beyonder Crystal remain unknown. Yet, those exiles of the Nightwings, who claimed to have seen this apparition, all spoke of her with degrees of reverence or perhaps a little fear.
Gilman.
The Worm Knight, Sir Gilman, had elected to go into exile as penance for his failures to uphold his military obligations to the Commonwealth. To him, earning back his freedom was tantamount to erasing the shame of his past. His honor was at stake more so than anything. Yet, when it became clear to him that he would not go free again through the rites, he readily accepted the outcome, for he knew by then that much more was on the line. He regretted not having had a chance to contribute directly to the events that transpired in the Commonwealth, though he was pleased to hear the outcome. The conclusion of the rites and the fall of the Commonwealth made clear to him that his days as a knight had ended. He declared to all those in earshot that he would never fight again. Unless, of course, there arose some other extraordinary set of circumstances, again requiring him to fight, but he certainly hoped not. He still trained regularly, though never found as skilled and motivating a partner as his fleet-footed friend Ricky Greentail, whom he remembered fondly. From time to time, he would seek guidance from one of his former comrades, Big Bertrude, much his elder, and a wellspring of perspective on his life decisions. He was always grateful for the counsel of the reader, and would regale him over and over about the time they squashed the spawn of the unfathomed plurns. You, the reader. Me, yeah, hi. He wasted no time dwelling on his days under the leadership of Sir Deluge, his former commander. The other Worm Knight stayed well clear of him. Gilman never did return to his homeland of the Sea Dominion, and was content to lead a monastic life on a small residence in the hills. It was just high up enough to make him keep striving to conquer his fear of heights. Other than that, an intense daily training regimen and the occasional visit from an old companion was more than enough to keep him optimistic and engaged. He knew by then that honor was not something to be won, but a contract with oneself, to be renewed each day. Several exiles of the Nightwings cared more for the plan of Sandalwood than to return home from the downside. The crone called Big Bertrude was a prime example. She had found a suitable environment to live within the dismal region known as Flagging Hands. There, she had built a thriving place of business known to many exiles in the land. With the rites having ended, she returned to her preoccupations, working away almost as though nothing had happened. When one gets to be more than 400 years of age, perhaps then even monumental events such as the culmination of the rites or the collapse of the Commonwealth are seen as trifling matters. Much of her effort was doubtless due to the influence of Sandalwood, someone whom she had admired now for decades. He had made clear that he could not requite her feelings for him, but what could have been a hurtful dismissal led only to a deeper understanding between them. By and large, Bertrude kept focused on her work. Whether casting small enchantments or imbuing talismans, the work brought her a sense of purpose, she would say. In the Commonwealth, such services were strictly forbidden, but in the downside, there was a real need for simple luxuries, which the competing slug market could not always provide. Thus did Big Bertrude continue to live up to her name, and the tales of her days with the Nightwings made her that much more of a living legend. When the cycle of the rites ceased turning, Bulford Sandalwood just turned back into a tree. The end, no more.
No.
Turned toward the starless sky and closed his eyes and prayed. It was all that he could do at the stage of his plan. He aspired to assemble with liberated exiles representing each of the 8 largest ethnic groups composing the population of the Commonwealth. They would stand together as a vision of the 8 scribes returned, inspiring the masses to embrace an older set of values, from before the Commonwealth had tightened its grip. With the rites ending sooner than expected, his ideal scenario became impossible. Sandalwood's own freedom, for instance, was now forfeit. Yet, the plan did have contingencies. Word reached him that on the night of Scribe's return, several of his fellow liberated Nightwings stood together and their voices echoed through the streets. It was vital to Sandalwood that this stand against the Commonwealth be peaceful in its nature, but this proved to be untenable. Yeah, we had to get one more person back. We didn't do that. That would have caused a peaceful revolution. Especially after the High Wing remnants appeared. There was speculation that their well-timed assault may not have happened by coincidence, though Sandalwood denied any involvement and regretted the bloodshed. Nevertheless, the main thrust of the plan had been achieved. Sandalwood kept busy after that, as much as possible, providing counsel from afar to those who would be at the forefront of the birth of the Saurian Union. Of course, being stranded in the downside meant that there was only so much he could do. Resting assured that the future of the nation was in capable hands, he turned his attention to the remaining exiles of the downside. They might never return to that new nation, but at least they could experience its triumphs and its struggles in some vicarious way. So he took to his old work, writing and printing. And as literacy began to spread throughout the Saurian Union, so too did exiles of the downside take to it. For his part, Sandalwood helped to teach as many as he could. More than that, he provided the material to read a semi-annual report about the latest events both in the Saurian Union and the downside. This periodical gave many exiles something to look forward to. One of his allies... Jesus Christ, I'm so emotional.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I'm so fucking happy right now, but I'm so sad. This is the bittersweetest ending, Everest. One of his allies in all this was the Imp Tizo, with whom he traveled all across the downside. Sandalwood often cited Tizo as the wellspring of his own enthusiasm for a brighter future. Such was the creature's spirit. He welcomed the company of the reader of the Nightwings at every opportunity, and counted him a trusted friend and a keen editor. Hi. As Wilfred Sandalwood gained more fame throughout this land for all his sacrifices and his contributions, it is said that he remained steadfast about two things. The first was that the cause itself ought to remain in focus. The freedom that the people had achieved. It was a gift to be cherished, a set of values that needed to be nurtured. The second point he made was that he himself had little to do with the outcome. He would often praise the exiles of the Nightwings, who had stood with him each in turn by name. He never forgot any of them. One day, to commemorate his birthday, the people of the Saurian Union unveiled a monument, depicting him and the Nightwings, as imagined in their prime. While Sandalwood did not learn about it until much later, it is said that he was moved to tears then by the gesture. It is since ensured that those of us with memories more fallible than that of Sandalwood likewise remember the achievements of his fellow former exiles, and our cause. You don't want to know what happened to Slug Market? With the rights drawn to a close, the Slug Market's revenues fell precipitously, and Falcon Ron was forced to liquidate his assets and close up shop. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those of an entrepreneurial leaning, this time of hardship led to an epiphany, or at least a sudden change of fortune. One day, Falcon Ron had a run-in with a messenger imp bearing news from the other side. Ron gave it to one of the remaining... gave to it one of his remaining trinkets, which could not be sold. Ah. He becomes a runner. The following week, the messenger imp returned to him bearing a tidy sum of wealth in newly minted coinage from the Saurian Union. Falcon Ron cut a long-term deal with the messenger imp then and there.
Oh, yeah, you're popping. That's okay. We're just gonna keep going.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Though his trade remained a gray area from a legal standpoint in the Saurian Union, the newfound fame in the downside caused Falcon Ron's goods to explode in popularity. He later signed an elaborate agreement with Big Bertrude's and found a distribution partner on the other side through Rookie Greentail, whose own business had expanded. Especially in the Saurian Union, Falcon Ron's goods are still known for their superior quality, though he assumes no liability for any side effects.
Good job, Falcon Ron.
I am pleased for him.
Oh, are they same group? Oh no, they're different.
Oh, I feel so bad for them. I can't believe we separated him from Faye. As the cycle of the rites drew to a close, it grew evident that a chance at freedom from the downside had forever slipped from Dalbert and Almir Oldheart's grasp. Thus, they and the exiles of the Fate returned to Jomwir Valley. There they struggled to get by, as exiles of the downside tend to do. Some time after the rites had ended, the Old Hearts at last heard the news of the Commonwealth had fallen. This was well after the fact, of course, but it brought old Dalbert great joy. Despite his forthright manner, he had no love for the nation that cast him down, along with his son. Dalbert Oldheart passed peacefully in his sleep before the next new moon. In his final days, he implored his son to undertake a pilgrimage to the scribes. Almir never shared his father's view of the scribes, but respected Dalbert's wishes. And so after a period of mourning, Almir began a new journey. Not a day went by that Almir Oldheart did not think of his father and give thanks to him, and speak to him at morning and at night. Would that the stars yet shone, for surely Dalbert's would be there among them, smiling down at his son and watching over him and his kin. And this asshole, I don't give a shit. After the liberation rite, Lendl refused to believe that the rites truly ended. He would sit through night after consecutive nights, staring into the blackness of the sky, awaiting any kind of sign that he might gain another chance at freedom. No such sign ever came. His fellow accusers started to express concern for him. Survival had become their top priority once liberty had slipped from their grasp. But Lendl dismissed them as weak fools. He insisted, rather forcefully, that any evening now the stars would shine for him again and mark the way toward his inevitable freedom. There's always just one asshole. He was, of course, mistaken. The others in his triumvirate were left with little choice but to abandon him. After the exile known as Lendl the Liar was never seen again. However, there have since been sightings of a bedraggled demon who wanders the downside and bears Lendl's cruel countenance, suggesting he yet lives. It's like hunting for Bigfoot. Oh, Jesus, I can't believe we let you out. After her liberation, Witch and Maildhif fled to her native home in the southern bogs, rejecting all festivities and honors she could have received. She was never seen again during the events that transpired in and around the Commonwealth. Some of those, with knowledge of the rites and legends of the downside, suggest she willingly cast herself back into exile to be closer to Y'Shlak. Other rumors suggest that her obsession with pyromancy and the dark arts ultimately consumed her. If she lives, for her kind are able to live for many centuries, there is no telling where. Her repeated threats of the return of Y'Shlak were thoroughly investigated and no credence was found to any of her claims. Bye, bitch. All his life, Sir Deluge had fled from one danger only to find himself facing another. He had escaped the war-torn waters of the Sea Dominion. He had escaped the blood border of the Commonwealth, and now he had escaped the rites. After the rites had ended, many exiles wrapped up in the ancient test were crestfallen as their last chances to return to their homes vanished along with the stars above. But Deluge did not mind, for this outcome meant that at last there was no burden of responsibility weighing down on him. Having heard that Sir Gilman also remained behind, Deluge made a point of avoiding him at all costs. Nonetheless, they ran into each other, once, riding a cold current in the Sea of Solace. The meeting was terse and cordial. Deluge ended up apologizing profusely for mistreating his fellow Worm Knight, and that was the end of it. While most of his fellow exiles of the Pyre Hearts yet longed for the waters of the Sea Dominion, driven as ever by their impulses toward conflict, Deluge settled down. With him remained one of his companions, one Lady Seagrass, who had taken a liking to him, for some reason. Reportedly, they disappeared into the waters of Worm Gulf, which may begin to explain the significant increase in worm population observed in the vicinity. Nicely done, Deluge. Oh, God. Barker Ashpaws never had much interest in returning to the Commonwealth, for he always found its bylaws to be stifling, so when the rites ended, he did not care. At first. He soon grew very bored. The rites had given his life a certain sense of structure he had always needed. He missed the raw anticipation of it all. He decided to continue conducting the rites for the thrill of it. He bent some of the rules and replaced some of the objects, but it was close enough. His packmates, the dissidents, proved to be more than happy to participate, and thus they ran against each other back in the Jumir Valley. Gradually, other exiles familiar with the rites, as well as those who had not heard of it at all, started to take interest. They ended up giving Barker Ashpaws some healthy competition. His old feud with Rookie Greentail ceased meaning anything to him, and he forgot all about it amid his new pursuits. Ultimately, even Barker Ashpaws, who had led such a directionless existence to that point, found something of a calling through the rites. Whether he took the rites less seriously than any other exile in his time or more was oft debated by those who watched him work.
Yeah, he was really excited last time we went against him.
He just enjoys the competition of it all. Ugh, as soon as possible after Tamitha Thane earned back her liberty, she rejoined her sisters of the Highwing remnants in the mountains north of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth believed that someone such as she could be rehabilitated through years spent in exile. Instead, her hatred for the ancient enemies only intensified. I'm not surprised. Why would you think that she would ever switch sides? On the night of the scribe's return, the Highwing remnants were poised to strike the Commonwealth in a decisive blow. They had received credible intelligence about the expected positions of the Commonwealth leadership, and of specific weaknesses in the Blood Border's defenses anticipated that night. After a surgical procedure, Tamitha could fly again. Almost as well as as prior to her exile. She insisted on spearheading the attack with a squadron of harps, of the harp's finest. They descended on their foes exactly as planned. The chaos that had risen in the streets of the Commonwealth that night made for an optimal diversion. Nonetheless, the battle took its toll. Many of Tamitha's sisters fell. She herself sustained many grievous wounds, but ignored them all and fought with a terrible fury. By dawn, the leaders of the Commonwealth had been eliminated, and Tamitha was limping back toward the mountains. She would never fly again. Soon after the fall of the Commonwealth, Tamitha attended a debriefing in which her blood sister Pamitha was also in attendance. Tamitha was very skeptical that Pamitha could have played a beneficial role in the preceding events, and lashed out at her. Pamitha made no attempt to elude the attack, and was struck full on. She wanted her repentance, I suppose. It was penance. It wasn't penance! It's called self-harm, even when you let someone else do it to you. This cost Pamitha the use of her right wing. Yet, after she recovered, she shrugged the incident aside, and said maybe they would call it even now. From that point on, the Blood Sisters kept a formal distance, but were cordial with each other. After the rise of the Saurian Union, Tamitha Thane continued to serve as flight tactician, and remained respected and feared, even among her own kind. However, without a war to wage, she grew more distant even than usual. Those closest to her surmised that her inability to reconcile with her blood sister was at the heart of this, though for her part, Tamitha never once admitted to any such weakness. God. When Manly Tinderstaff realized the rites had ended, and that he no longer could return to the Commonwealth through this ancient means, he was outraged. He flipped his hair so fervently everyone in a 2-mile radius got whiplash. He cursed the scribes, spewing forth such a slew of blasphemy as to be very unbecoming of one of his high status and bearing. When at last he calmed himself, he focused all his energies on attempting to find another means of homecoming. He maintained regular contact with his wealthy family on the other side via Messenger Imp, and used their vast resources to explore other means of escape. He tried using an elaborate pulley system. He attempted to retrofit a flying black wagon with superior propulsion. He tried an imp raft, a hot air balloon, even prayer. Nothing worked. There was only one way to escape the downside, and now it was gone. Tinderstauf bankrupted his family in these vain attempts. At last, such was his shame that he retreated to the teeming woods of Black Basin. To Cinderroot. There he yet wallows, complaining to his comrades of the chastity who still put up with him, either about his own misfortune or the latest news from the other side. I'm really sorry you never got back to Moira. There should be another way. Things have changed. Why can't we just break the border?
I think the downside is magical. You just can't.
Friendship is magical.
Mm-hmm.
Once it became clear to Ignarius that the rites were drawing to a close, he knew that it was time for him and the Tempers to call it quits. But first, he and the Tempers decided to celebrate. And that they did, for many, many nights. The revelry did eventually subside, the exiles parted amicably, and went their separate ways. He roamed the downside, then searching for some meaning in his life, sometimes taking odd jobs requiring his brute strength. He never remained alone for very long, and took on many lovers in his time. However, he sometimes thought about the one he had called Curly Horns, and what became of her. Through his glory days as the most powerful conductor of the rites, though his glory days as the most powerful conductor of the rites had long since passed, he always enjoyed the fearsome reputation he had cultivated at the time. Oralek. You want to save him for last, or not? After the Shimmer Pool closed for what would be the last time, and the second time it closed in his face, Oralek looked around him in the flickering light of the Nightwing's still-burning pyre. He then turned to the Fall of Solium and looked up toward the black, starless sky. Don't tell me you threw yourself off the cliff. He cursed the 8 scribes. Then, one after the other. I fucking called it. I could have shipped you with sandalwood. I could have drawn you boys having coffee in the morning. I could have done it. After that, he strode forward towards the waters coursing from the side of Mount Elodiel, and without hesitating, he cast himself down. Oralek's body was never recovered. The drop from Mount Elodiel does not appear survivable, though Oralek did survive it once. That time, however, he was filled with fury, such was the betrayal he had suffered when his fellow exile claimed his rightful freedom. This time, Oralek was filled with nothingness, and chose to leave the downside in the one way he still knew he could. Did we do the right thing?
I don't think there is a right thing.
There wasn't a right thing? Could have sent him home. Didn't he want all this over too?
I don't know what
Why couldn't we get more people on our side? So many of them wanted to see the Commonwealth dashed and rebuilt. Why couldn't we just make them all a part of us?
We did what we could.
The other Nightwings who were witness to this never forgot what they saw. After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, the lone minstrel bade the remaining Nightwings take the black wagon and seek their fortunes elsewhere in the downside. Their parting was heartfelt but brief. He remained there at the summit of Mount Elodiel with Celeste, where the two of them would chronicle the final outcome of the cycle. Neither Tariq nor Celeste were ever seen again. We know all this now through song attributed to them. Some claim these songs originated in the taverns of the Sarian Union and merely were imbued with the weight of folklore. However, exiles liberated from the downside corroborated each other's claims at having met this duo that presided over the liberation rites. Another folktale suggests these minstrels were heralds of the scribes. Having fulfilled their obligations, they departed the world we know, and rejoined their patrons. One of their famous songs described another, simpler outcome. The two of them gave up their duties to the rites in favor of a life they could share together. In any case, they are likely to remain the subject of such verse and such songs, for it was they who watched over the rites and ushered in our times.